everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and once again, another 24 hours has passed. And with those 24 hours comes amazing stories of Ukrainian gallantry, heroism, and sacrifice. As per usual, I would like to say, I usually preface all my streams with this, that Ukraine was not supposed to survive longer than a day, and here we are on day 15, talking about how they have held the country for this much longer. I believe at this point that the Ukrainians are probably going to be able to hold out for an incredibly long time, to say that at the least. So moving on from that, we're going to cover how we're covering the fronts today. It's going to be the usual system of covering the northern front, the eastern front that includes the location unknown, Sumy and Kharkiv area, and then we'll be covering the southern front. You may notice that there's a lot less markers on this map, and that's because this is the new week 3 map. So this is day 15, and so there's absolutely no other markers on this map rather than the first day. Also, for all of my new viewers who may be watching right now, I'm going to explain this because I have rarely explained this, and I'd like to make sure the people know what the map is all about. So, starting off with the green areas, because that's probably where the most questions are. The green areas are the areas that the Russians want to capture. And while this area is kind of small, and I feel like we're going to go into tomorrow's stream and talk about maybe what their new battle plans are, because it appears that they're becoming a little bit more ambitious and having to change them. But at the moment, this is what they look like according to me on the first day. This was 15 days ago, and I said that they would be trying to capture the areas in green. And if I was able to show y'all the day 1 map, you would see that almost nothing has changed since day 1 in terms of how the front line looks, rather than these breakthrough areas that aren't really controlled by the Russians, but they've driven through. The red front lines represent the Russian front lines. So these are your solid, hardcore front lines. These are the ones we know about for sure. They've been documented enough to know that this is where they are. And so those lines are in red. These kind of like maroonish purple lines, if you want to call them purple or maroon, doesn't really matter to me. But these lines are used to show where breakthrough convoys have gone. So the Russians don't really control this. The Ukrainians are still kind of in control, but a convoy broke through the Ukrainian lines at some point and made a mad dash for somewhere. And so that's what this area is meant to suggest. And I'd like to make a special note about this, because when I see a lot of mainstream news maps like CNN or Fox, they make it clear on some of the maps that they show in detail that there's this large clubfoot area that encompasses kind of like the same area I've got on my map in maroon. But but sometimes they fill it in and say it's a Russian area of control, which is very confusing wordage, or they'll say it's under Russian control, which is not true. These areas are used by breakthrough convoys, and they don't actually have any Russian forces occupying that part of the country. So if you've been seeing the mainstream news, I hate to say it, and I don't really want to like stand up to the national news, because I'm a stream and they're national, but nonetheless, sometimes they represent that map and it's entirely untrue. So that being said, I think I've covered almost... Oh, yes, I'll cover this down here. This is something I'll, of course, probably cover later in the stream. But this green line is showing where I believe the Russians will advance. It'll be down this kind of center road on the front line, so that way they can kind of split the Ukrainian defensive line into 2 and make it appear more advantageous for the Ukrainians to retreat to a more defensible position, probably along the N15 highway. So the green line represents a Russian advance, and the yellow line represents where the Ukrainians will probably set up a new line of defense. That being said, oh yeah, also the blue area is a naval invasion area, but we don't really know about that. That's all assumptions and hypothesis. We don't really have any information to even back that up anymore. It looks like the Russians have abandoned that, if they even had a plan for it, because we heard that they did. So that being said, I've covered everything on the front line and the map and what it represents. And if you want to download the map, there's a brief description up here at the top. The link in the description to the map is down below. So I know I butchered that sentence. But regardless, we're going to move on to the biggest news today, which is the 40-mile-long convoy. And we finally gotten news that it moved. Some of it moved back to Belarus. It appears that the 40-mile-long convoy has been repositioned around the front lines, and most of the vehicles that were once in this convoy appear to be hiding in tree lines along the road, or they've been moved to low, kind of like, how would I say this? Kind of like low action areas. That's not really the proper wordage, but I think you get what I'm saying. Areas that really aren't involved in a lot of firefighting, which don't require a lot of usage of supplies, at least from what we can see on satellite footage. And so it appears that the assumption that I made a while ago that the Russian convoy had stalled because it had run out of supplies is true, because how they've repositioned the parts of the convoy that's moved suggests that they still don't have enough supplies to support those units, and it would be more beneficial to just kind of keep them in the area and consuming very little to no supplies than try and send them back, which would eat up a whole lot of supplies as well. Meanwhile, 17 miles of this convoy are still stuck on the road and still have not moved. But these are the more rearward parts of the convoy, more away from the Ukrainian front than the rest of it. And I believe that they may have done some sort of emergency management there to move these forward parts of the convoy off the road and into areas that were a little bit safer, and maybe make them go into a little bit of use, because the Ukrainians were starting to destroy them to a large degree, and so it was kind of like a saving measure to make sure that they could save the forward part of the convoy instead of just letting it sit there on the road and slowly get destroyed. So it appears that the hypothesis was true, that the Russians did not have enough supplies to support that convoy, because hardly any of it's moved. It's moved to areas that require little supplies for them to operate, and then 17 miles of it is still left on the road. And I also forgot to mention that there was a part of it that actually went back to Belarus, and as far as we know, they're being sent to another area of the war, to another offensive, who knows where, but they've been moved back out of the country, probably to try and alleviate the already stressed supply and logistical system that the Russians have. So that being said, that's incredible news. We know that the Russians aren't just sitting there and waiting and strategically planning. That thing actually fell apart. We can almost say that it was certainty now, but once again, I do have to say, although I'm saying it was certainty, take that with a grain of salt. It's nothing more than a bunch of assumptions based off of what we're seeing, so it may not be true, but it looks like that's what happened, and we'll see in the coming days and weeks. Maybe when the war is over, we'll get an entire story about what happened there, and we'll actually see whether that's true or not. Anyways, moving down towards the Borodyanka and Kyiv area, we can see that the Russians were on the move in Borodyanka today. This was taken by the Russians, and it's rather self-explanatory. If we can all learn a lesson from anything that's happened during the war, any vehicle in the Russian army flying a medical flag of any kind is probably carrying weapons, but then again, that's nothing more than an assumption. This one may actually be carrying medical equipment. I just know something very interesting on this one Tiger here. If we look at the top, it looks like they've covered the top of this armored car with sandbags, and what that may suggest is that they're trying to do some kind of armor additions, improvised armor additions to the roof of the Tiger, so that way they can maybe protect themselves a little bit better from javelins, because I believe javelins do have two ways they can hit a target. They can fly over the top and explode, kind of like a TOW2, and they explode downwards into the vehicle, or they can hit it dead on. I don't really know what kind the Ukrainians are using in mass. I believe they're using the one that explodes over the target and shoots the explosives downwards into it, because the Russians are using javelin cages. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm very tired still. But javelin cages on top of their tanks, and so it looks like they're piling sandbags on the roof of their Tigers, kind of like how the United States used to put sandbags in the back of IFVs and APCs in Iraq and Afghanistan to try and give the crew a little bit better protection against IEDs or explosives that blow up under the vehicle. I'd also like to give a shout out to Scooby-Doo and the gang. Let me just back that up just a little bit. Right there, Scooby-Doo and the gang. Everyone was making fun of these little trucks, well, cars. I'm not really sure what they are. They kind of look like the Volkswagen hippie vans, but I believe their actual designation is something like an R100. But I'm not really sure about that, and if any of y'all know what that thing is actually called, let me know in the chat. So anyways, what we can see is that the Russians are moving a lot of forces around Borodyanka. We don't really know where. We don't know if they're trying to move back out south towards Kalinivka or west. We don't really know, but we do know that they're moving a substantial amount of units around Borodyanka. Anyways, near the area of Hostomel, we can see that Russians are taking on casualties to a very high amount, maybe, based off of what we can see in this video. In this video, we can see helicopters being loaded up with the wounded Russian soldiers that the Russians are claiming they're not getting a lot of, but in this video you can see that they've apparently set up an entire operation to evacuate loads of them. Sorry for the grainy quality of the footage. So anyways, what we can see from that is that it appears that the Russians are taking a lot of casualties, or otherwise they wouldn't be setting up an evacuation point at Hostomel. Well, then again, they would probably set up an evacuation point even if they weren't. But it is suggesting that the Russians may be taking on a large amount of casualties, and if we could get any more information about the area around Hostomel and their medical evacuation capabilities, and the amount of flights helicopters are taking out of there per day, that may be able to iron down a number for us as to how many wounded or dead soldiers are being airlifted out of the Kyiv area back to Belarus or Russia. Moving on from that, we can see that there was some Russian artillery in action near Kyiv. I'll show you all that video right now.
Это артиллеристы наносят удары по бронетехнике украинской армии под Киевом. Разведывательный беспилотник обнаружил танки ВСУ в непосредственной близости от позиций российских подразделений. Высокоточный ударный комплекс. Полет снаряда корректируется по лазерному лучу. Каждый выстрел – поражение цели. Российская группировка под Киевом сейчас ведет огневое поражение укрепленных районов противника в непосредственной близости от украинской столицы. Уничтожается артиллерия ВСУ, склады горючего и боеприпасов, техника и на линии боевого соприкосновения и в тылу. При этом российские бойцы вынуждены действовать предельно осторожно. И регулярные войска, и националистические формирования киевского режима используют жилые кварталы для размещения артиллерии, организации опорных пунктов. Вот здесь наглядно понятно, кто и как воюет. Подразделения армии «Россия» заходили в этот населенный пункт с той стороны. Вооруженные силы Украины пытались поразить колонны российской армии, используя реактивные системы залпового огня. Дивизионы находятся в той стороне. Но били украинские военные по жилым многоквартирным домам. Вот последствия попадания реактивных снарядов системы «Смерч» и «Ураган». Российская группировка сил у Киева также обеспечивает безопасность передвижения беженцев. Прорваться через линию фронта удается немногим. ВСУ и нацбаты режим тишины в районе гуманитарных коридоров не соблюдают.
А, не откроется?
Стекло не откроет. Этой машине лет больше, чем мне.
Бежи на багажник.
Сейчас. Давайте еще одну.
Ага.
Я вам на багажник приеду. Садитесь.
Спасибо.
Счастливого пути вам.
Спасибо.
И спокойно погружаться.
I don't know if those are civilians, but if you're painting a V on a car, that's a way to get yourself killed if you're a civilian in Ukraine. Anyways, moving on from that, we're going to move over to this footage that we've seen over here, which is the aftermath of another Bayraktar drone attack on the Russians. I'll show you all that right now.
Трохи горить. Горить. Все горить, палає. Картоплю спиздили, блядь, десь нашу. Підар їбучі.
Ласка. Отак от буває, коли приходиш на українську землю. Отак от буває.
Now we continue to see the after effects of drone attacks, and what that's telling me is that the Ukrainian Air Force, while the airspace is still contested, we don't see a lot of Ukrainian aircraft in action on video compared to the amount we see of Russian aircraft. That could be one of two reasons. One, the Ukrainian Air Force is small, so it may be that they don't have enough aircraft to actually field a large number. They just have enough to ensure that the airspace is contested. Or two, the Ukrainian Air Force is relying heavily on the Bayraktar drones to be able to carry out ground support missions. One or the other is true. I'm not really sure which one it is, and that's entirely assumptions. It may be the Ukrainian Air Force is actually giving a huge fight to the Russian Air Force. We just don't know because we don't see a lot of videos of that kind of stuff anymore. But nonetheless, we're going to move on to this area near Obolon, and we can see that there was a Ukrainian counterattack in Kyiv, which appears to be somewhat successful. I'll show you all the videos so that you can see for yourselves. The firefight was pretty large. I don't really think, honestly, we don't know where these Ukrainians are. You know, there's no discernible landmarks around them to show that. But if we could take a look at this right here, I'm not, I've never been in the field, so I don't really know what it's like. But the spacing is really close here, and so hopefully none of them got targeted because they were so close to each other around that tree. But I don't really know about any of that. I just know about overall strategy and logistics in a way. So we're going to move on from that, and I'm going to show y'all this column of 40 vehicles that was destroyed near Kyiv. Now this is a massive number, and I'm just going to let y'all watch the video and see it for yourselves. It's rather self-explanatory in a way.
Двинулась колона в сторону Києва. Колона була велика, була організована засідка, була розбита голова колони. Колона налічувала на тому напрямку близько 40 одиниць техніки.
So there's a bit of a question in my mind, at least to me, that how in the world are the Ukrainians capturing convoys in such a size? I know we only saw one tank in that video, but we are able to know that across the entirety of the war, in every single front, we've seen a lot of Russian vehicles get captured. And so a lot of people, including me, are wondering, how in the world did they do that? And I believe I may have an answer. It's not going to be the be-all answer to this. You know, there's, of course, many different ways that this can occur. But historically, the best way to wipe out a convoy of tanks, a column of tanks, if you want to call them that, like if we look at the Battle of, what was it called? The Chosin Reservoir in North Korea, we could see that when the United States got attacked there, the Chinese, because it was really the Chinese winning that war at that point for the North Koreans, the Chinese would destroy the first tank in the column and then the last tank, and this would cause a problem for the rest of the tanks because they couldn't go backwards and they couldn't go forwards because there was obstacles in the way. There was a tank in the front, tank in the back that was destroyed and could no longer move. And so the only thing that they could do is sit there and either be destroyed, fight back, or abandon the tanks and run. Or they could sit, or, you know, and if they fought, they'd have to wait until some kind of recovery vehicle got to one side of this convoy and moved one of the wrecked tanks off the road so the rest of them could keep on moving. And also that was done in Chechnya to less or worser degrees of success. In Grozny, it was very common for the Russians to lose dozens, if not 100 tanks a day because these convoys would just drive straight into town like it was some kind of massive armored war, you know, in the Cold War. And the Chechens would destroy the first tank of the convoy, the last tank of the convoy, and then the rest of these tanks would be stuck with almost no support. Sometimes they would begin to lose communications because the Russians have never really invested heavily in communications technologies. Just reference the war in Georgia in 2009 as an example. But beyond that, the Russians just get the tanks killed really easy, especially because they never really support them much with infantry, especially in Grozny. If we ever look at what happened there, the tanks that they sent in during that time were almost never supported with infantry, and so they were prime pickings for you know, pretty much free rebel fighters in the city to just destroy them one by one after they destroyed the first vehicle and the last vehicle in the column. And so what we may be seeing here, because the Ukrainian alluded, one of the Ukrainians in that interview alluded to that, he said they destroyed the first vehicle in the convoy. Now, I don't know if he said the last one as well, because I can't understand Ukrainian at all. But if they destroyed the first one, we can probably assume that they destroyed the last one, and then the Russians who were in the tanks decided that since they were apparently lacking infantry support, because it looks like the Ukrainians still controlled that entire area where the convoy was at, they got out of the tanks and abandoned them and maybe even surrendered to the Ukrainians. But we don't have any information on that, and that's all nothing more than kind of like hypotheses and assumptions on this, because it may have been a little bit different. And once again, that's not going to be entirely representative of the way that the Russian tanks are captured across the entirety of the country, because of course things are different in each situation, and it would be on a case-by-case basis. So nonetheless, that's a way that the Ukrainians could capture a lot of Russian tanks in kind of a smart way and force the Russians' hands, at least the crew's hands, to give up the vehicles. Anyways, moving on down to the area of Irpin, we've seen that evacuations have been underway today still. I'll show you the video. It's rather self-explanatory.
Друзі, коротко про сьогоднішній день. Ми з ребятками поїхали в Ірпінь, перейшли мост. Ігорюня знайшов буса.
Знайшов ракету, ребята, з ключами просто.
Хтось залишив ключа і написав «Машина індійця», залишив свій номер. Спеціально для того, щоб ми возили і допомагали людям.
Oh, wait a minute, hang on. I just realized that there was music in that, so I'm going to have to mute it. I'm sorry, y'all. They've been evacuating civilians from the area of Irpin for a couple of days at this point, and it appears that the evacuations are still underway because the Ukrainians control most of the city as far as I know, and so there's no active fighting going on to that area as of now. So it's pretty much safe to move the civilians out, but they're having to move in kind of a race against the clock in a way, because it's unknown whether the Russians would be able to push back into the city at any time. And so anyways, I'm going to cut that video short because we got a general idea. It was only 10 more seconds left. And we're going to move over to the eastern side of Kyiv, where we finally heard today that the Russians have arrived for real. I don't know where exactly because it's saying near Brovary, but near Brovary could be to the north, the east, or the south. We don't really know, but we do know that there were forces near Brovary, and from what my information is, they would most likely be coming from the northern area, and so that's why the markers are here. But they could be to the east. That's also another plausible location for where they are. Nonetheless, we can see that a huge convoy near Brovary was attacked. I'll show you all that right now. You see how in the sequence of events, one of the first tanks in the convoy appears to be hit, and then if we see in the next clip that the last tank in the convoy appears to be hit by something. You see. And so they're trying to do the same tactic again to this large convoy as well. But you can see that this one apparently, since the road was wide enough, they just kind of moved on. Except for that tank, probably. It looks like it sustained an extensive amount of damage in that blast. So now we're going to move on to the next video, which is the destroyed vehicles near Brovary. I'm not sure if these are from the same convoy or not. I'm not really sure. I can't really attest whether they are or not. But let's see if that video will pull up here. It appears that it may not be. Unfortunately, it isn't. So we'll have to skip that one. And we're going to move to the equipment that was captured near Brovary. Hopefully that one will load. Yes, it did. It's the exact same tanks. Okay, this was labeled as equipment captured. Okay, alright, I think the story just came together. I think this is the 40 vehicle convoy that they captured, but earlier in the day, I was told it was on the western side of Kyiv, and then later on, hours later, when I was updating the news again, it was actually confirmed to be on the eastern side of Kyiv, and so it was never updated. It was just a new marker put down. And so, with that being said, I'm going to get rid of this one. And we're just going to keep the three over here so that way we know that these three go together as a story. So we saw the convoy in the video, and it appears that they later on actually were able to stop them entirely and destroy the first vehicle and the last in the convoy. We can see that they had no infantry support in the video. So the story that I was giving earlier, that if they don't have infantry support, they're prime targets for, infantry inside of an urban area, appears to stand up to be mostly true as far as we know. And so it looks like the Ukrainians did capture the entire 40 vehicle convoy. I just hope that we can get some videos showing that entire 40 vehicle convoy captured within the coming days. And so anyways, we're going to move on towards Chernihiv. We're going to start off with this Russian anti-air radar vehicle being destroyed. It apparently was called a NS-18M1, a very creative name. It's apparently a radar for the Buk anti-air systems, which from what I can tell, looked to be on the same kind of chassis as this vehicle. But nonetheless, this one's destroyed, so we know that a Buk unit may be out of a radar vehicle. So that's very good information for us to know. We're going to move on to the southern area around Chernihiv, where today we've seen the Ukrainians engage in a fight against some Russian armor, and I'll show you all that video right now.
Не горить, блядь. Так тут перший горить. Та хуй там, блядь. Перший там давно розорваний, блядь.
While it's a short video, over the course of the next 30 minutes to an hour, from what I was able to tell from stories on the internet today, the Ukrainians in that video won the battle against the tanks, and apparently destroyed most of them. And here's the video of the aftermath from apparently the same general area.
Не доїхали, кацапи.
Да. все вже, вони їх.
To get involved in a little bit of storytelling, because maybe we can actually tie these two videos together and get some kind of points of reference, so that way we can see if these videos are kind of interconnected. It looks like in this video right here that we were just watching just a second ago, it appears that they're on that tree line over there in the video where this explosion happened in like the first video. And so what I can assume is that the Russian tanks didn't actually move far. It looks like they actually just started to drive into this field. And apparently that did not fare them well because they were destroyed. But nonetheless, we'll return to this video and I'll let y'all continue watching it.
Да.
Наша земля, хуй вот пройдут, блядь, по нашим болотам, блядь. Привет, блядь.
And now it appears that it's looping back again, so we'll cut that video a little bit short. But nonetheless, you can see the Ukrainians won a battle against these Russian tanks just south a little bit of Chernihiv. And since it was south of Chernihiv, we can assume it was on the P-69, probably heading towards Kyiv, which will further back up the assumption that this 40-vehicle convoy down here is on the northeastern side of Kyiv instead of the eastern side, because it appears that Russian vehicles are starting to flow down the P-69 towards Kyiv's northeastern side. So that being said, we're about to move on to the next front, and before I do, I'd like to take some questions. And so what do we got, Drew?
So first up, we have Fuse the Cat in chat once again, donating today. Do you think that a religious partnership could once again provide a solution to help this time with the Ukrainian/Russian diplomatic impasse?
I'm not really sure, because as far as I've been told, actually around like something like 15 to 20% of the Ukrainian population is a member of the Russian Eastern Orthodox Church. Apparently there's different branches of it, and one of them's a Russian branch, and then there's a Ukrainian branch. And 20% of them are, and so I don't really believe that religion would be a unifying force in this war. I believe this war kind of expands into strategic concerns that are beyond kind of like the normal cultural scope that involves, you know, societies and religion and stuff like this. This is more focused on more of like the strategic importance of Ukraine, because if Ukraine joins NATO or becomes Western aligned, Russia now shares thousands of miles of extra border that they didn't have before with NATO. If it becomes a Russian puppet, then their front line with NATO will be shortened by a large amount. And if it stays neutral, nothing changes at all. And so I don't really think it's I don't really think religion would be a unifying force, unfortunately. But I do hope that I answered the question well enough as to kind of like what the Russians' concerns are, so that way you can kind of see their perspective, at least from what we've been told they think. So I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
So same user, it's a double donation for the cat. Second part of the question, quoting from a book title, I believe, The Covenant Alliance, President Reagan and Pope John Paul II, Cold Warriors, stating or quoting from the book, historians regarded the work of President Reagan and Pope John Paul II to be a tremendous force in helping to end the Cold War.
I believe you just cut out there.
Oh, that's no good. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and just reread the quote that he mentioned from a book, saying that historians regarded the work of President Reagan and Pope John Paul II to be a tremendous force in helping to end the Cold War.
Yeah. Well, maybe. I don't really know much about the religious side of the Cold War. You know, I mostly know about the political side with Reagan and Gorbachev kind of having the back and forth talks. And even though they were making some progress in some ways, there's still tense standoffs, kind of like in 1985 with the Able Archer stuff and all that. So I don't really know. I can't really attest to that too much. But I do once again thank you very much for the support, and you may be right. Who knows? I'm just kind of ignorant in that realm as to how religion would tie into this conflict and also the Cold War. So I may have to look into that a little bit more when I can. But once again, thank you for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Next up, coming in from Bearcat, donated to the channel, asks or states, I know you majored in history, but did that cover the knowledge you have on military hardware? You appear to know so much about tanks and other hardware. It's amazing. Also, thank you for this channel and all that you are doing.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and once again, thank you for donating a super chat to the channel. It always helps us out, and I'm very thankful for it. The actual side of military knowledge actually didn't come from history classes. I actually think that history in public schools is usually lacking to a large degree. Like when they talk about all the causes and effects that led to World War I and also the fighting in World War I, and you know, anything really. You could go through any historical period, and you know, they completely skip like the 1600s, 1500s, the Holy Roman Empire era, and all they say for that era is it wasn't holy nor Roman nor an empire. And everyone, you know, duh, everyone knows that, but we want to know details. And so most of my historical knowledge, while I am majoring in history, it comes from my own kind of like readings. I actually, before the stream started, I have not had time at all to really read anything or learn anything beyond trying to keep up to date with this war and a whole bunch of other stuff going on in my life constantly, you know, like college and law school and stuff. I haven't actually had time to read, but most of this stuff is based off of what I've read. And I've luckily had a bunch of great friends in real life who've been in the military, and being exposed to them a lot, you would just hear them talk so much about it that you actually kind of start to piece together, not in a perfect way, but in a decent enough way, how the military kind of works along with what you're reading. And then it all starts to kind of click together in a way where the assumptions can be generally founded in fact, not always perfect, but somewhat based in truth. So I thank you very much once again for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next up comes in from Ben Fran, chipping into the channel, says, have you had a chance to look at Snapchat maps for intel? Ukraine is a little empty now, but many Russians are merely complaining that McDonald's is closing. Kind of sad.
It is kind of sad, and I've heard that Russians are panic buying the Big Mac, which I just find weird. I don't know how in the world that's going to work. Like, what do they expect? They're going to be able to have enough Big Macs for months? I don't understand that. I've seen them panic buying a lot of stuff. I actually made a note of that up here, which we'll get to when we cover the international events. It's the only one of the day, but that'll be done last. But nonetheless, I do think that that would be interesting to see going on Snapchat and looking at the activity, but I actually haven't done that because I've been looking at frontline stuff, and usually Snapchat, you know, I've never really looked at that as finding information, but honestly, now that I'm thinking about that, that may actually be a good route to go to and look down to try and find even more information if I can. So actually, I thank you very much for the idea. That's a really smart idea. I might look into that. And once again, thank you very much for your support. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next up, James Lynn, also donating to the channel, says, the firefight that you showed earlier, I'm not sure which one specifically, he says that there's a longer video that exists of that firefight.
I don't know of that one, actually. I never saw it. That was the longest video I found. I think the other one I saw was like 8 seconds, and that one was about twice as long as that. And so I went with it because it showed the most of the firefight. So sadly, I wish I could have found it, because if you're talking about a longer video, I'm sure there was a longer video out there, but sadly, I didn't see it. So if you would like to join the Discord, actually, because it sounds like you may be getting some, extra resources that I may not be finding. So if you would like to join the Discord and share that with us, I will probably try and put that in the stream, because every once in a while, people give me a little bit of information that I actually have not found, or better information of the same stuff I found, and it goes into stream. So who knows, you know, you may be able to send in something tomorrow and it may be on the stream. Who knows? Anyways, thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to 2 more questions, and then we're going to move on to the Eastern Front. So next question.
Next question comes from Reflection, also donating, says, how long will it take to get guns to the front? Say they are in Florida. What is the process and distribution? Can you give us a list of what has been sent?
I cannot give a list of what's been sent. I have 2 prior weeks of maps, and you can go around and kind of find all the stuff I documented being sent, and usually there's some kind of number attached to it. But I haven't been creating a spreadsheet on how much is sent. At the moment, I don't really think much of anything's being sent anymore, according to the news I've been getting. But that may be different. That may be wrong. It may just be that I'm not able to see that news based off of the places I'm going to find the news. But to get the guns from Florida, there's a whole bunch of ways you could do that. You could ship them by ship, but that's probably not a good option or feasible one, because if you transport it by ship, you'd either have to transport it to Western Europe, somewhere like Hamburg, and then unload it off the ship onto trucks, bring them to a rail depot, or there's usually a rail depot on the harbor. You would have to unload it from the ship, load it on a train, then that train would have to pass through hands in Germany. It would have to transfer companies in Poland, and then Poland would ship it into Ukraine. And I don't know if Poland just operates their own trains all the way through Ukraine to wherever they're stopping, or if they exchange crews or companies again. But that would be an extremely stretched out process. So I believe that if they were to transport guns, they're probably going to try and do it by plane, because modern wars move really quickly. And so fast response times in terms of shipping, even just on the commercial logistics side, is of utmost importance. Hence Amazon Prime. That's why these kinds of services exist these days, is because as the world advances in technology, things must be shipped at a faster pace. Everything actually must work at a faster pace. And so they're probably going to send it by aircraft to Germany, unload it in Germany onto a train, or they could fly to Poland. I don't know if freight aircraft fly that kind of range. I bet they do. So they might just fly them into Poland and then unload them onto a train and then ship them into Ukraine, which would shorten down the amount of time it will take for the weapons to get there, and it'll also shorten down, just shorten down the wait time. As far as how long that would take, I don't really know. We do know that an aircraft can fly from the United States to Poland in about 13 hours, but I don't know how long it would take them to load the aircraft, then unload it once it gets to Poland, load a train with that equipment, and then send it over the border. I don't really know the actual logistical speed that would operate at, but I'm sure it would be rather quick. I would assume it would be at least less than a week, and a week being the farthest out it would be. So once again, I thank you very much for the support, and also take that with a grain of salt. I really don't have any figures to base that off of. But I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the last question before we go to the eastern area.
Okay, last question or last comment comes from the general chat here, where a Mr. Jeff Brown brings up or mentions the German use of methamphetamines in the form of Pervitin. It'll be interesting to see if we see any parallels with the Russians.
Yeah, something interesting about that too is that I was reading at some point that during Desert War, around 50% of the pilots in the U.S. Air Force were using some kind of amphetamine. I don't really know if it was anything similar to Pervitin, but that's at least what I read online. And it appears that stimulants like that are used a lot by troops throughout the course of multiple wars, although it's not really illegal anymore and is mostly frowned upon. The Germans in World War II used them to great effect during the Battle of France, although that's kind of a complicated story, because in World War II, during the Battle of France, the German military was actually issuing Pervitin through multiple kinds. It was like chocolates and all sorts of stuff, but it had pretty much meth in it, and it helped the Germans to just do crazy things. But then they found out that there was a crash to this high that they were having. This caused serious medical effects. The soldiers were pretty much inoperable for days after this crash occurred, and also it was highly addictive. So after the German army got them all addicted to meth, then they decided that they were no longer going to issue them meth. And then the soldiers would start writing home to their families, because it wasn't banned across the entire country. Civilians could still buy it, and they would write to their families and ask them to mail them Pervitin through the mail system that got to the soldiers. And so that's how most of them began to get their Pervitin after the German army stopped issuing it. But I don't know if that's going to be the case in Russia. We do know that they have a history of using drugs in most forms of official events, like the Olympics. They've been known to juice their athletes to a large degree. And so maybe, I mean, like, you know, they're really famously known for using enhancing drugs, and so maybe they'll use them here. But I don't really know, and I don't really have information to go either way. So I hope I've answered your question with a little bit of historical context. It might happen. It still happened in recent history. So I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the Eastern Front. So starting off with the location unknowns, we've had a couple of these today. First off, we've seen some captured T-80Us of the 4th Guard Tank Division.
10 березня 22 року проводимо операцію забезпечення евакуації ворожої техніки. Перший такий значок. Значок, напевне, командирський.
Now, one thing I noticed about the ground at the beginning of this video, kind of talking to the weather in Ukraine, is that we can see that there's snowfall still on the ground. And from what we've seen of the area around Kyiv, while there was snowfall about a day or two ago, it appears that snowfall has thawed. And so we know that any videos of the Kyiv area are no longer going to have snow in them if they were taken today. And so we know that that video wasn't taken in the Kyiv area. So the best thing I can assume is that since there's only snow in the Sumy Kharkiv area, is that this is probably somewhere around Sumy and Kharkiv. But the interesting thing to me, and it looks like the video was going to start buffering, and I don't want y'all to hang out and you know, wait for that thing to buffer, is that the mud on the ground still appeared to be in like that Rasputitsa state, although it was kind of starting to freeze into place a little maybe. But it looked like the snow and the cold hadn't been around long enough to kind of start to solidify the ground again, so that way it was usable for tanks. It looked like tanks would still have a little bit of trouble in that kind of mud. So based off of that, I don't really think snowfall nor the temperature is really affecting the Rasputitsa situation around the entire country if it's popped up. But then again, that's nothing more than a hypothesis. That tank did get out in that field somehow, but we don't really know if it was to continue on, whether it would have gotten stuck or not due to the condition of the dirt in the field. So that being said, we're going to move on to this well-equipped TDF. It appears that a lot of supplies from around the world have finally arrived, and now the TDF is looking as well-equipped as their actual contract counterparts in the Ukrainian army. Anyways, I'll just let y'all see this video. This guy's also got a sick mustache, and I know that's not really a news reporting thing, but I have to respect the mustache. That's a really nice mustache. We could also see, and we know that he's been equipped with foreign equipment, is that right here, I'm no weapons expert, but that kind of looks like an M240. I'm not entirely sure, though. I may be entirely wrong on that. It doesn't. Actually, I'll take that back. It does not look like an M240. But we do know that he has a Panzerfaust III, which is certainly foreign equipment that's been imported from some country like the Netherlands or Belgium. So that being said, we know that these soldiers are for sure being equipped with foreign equipment, which is a very good thing because we've seen that they have such a large amount of it, at least in this video, that they actually have nothing but foreign equipment, but it's all good quality, and it's equipped them to the level to be comparable to what they're fighting against. So I'm very glad to see that, and I'm very glad to see that Western aid is actually helping them out for, to a good bit, and doing this fighting with the TDFs, which are kind of, you know, hastily put together, and the Ukrainians didn't have enough supplies to give them everything, you know, like helmets, body armor, anti-tank weapons, that sort of stuff. They didn't have enough of that, but they had AKs, and they had armbands, and so now we see that the TDFs are apparently getting much more well supplied. Anyways, moving on from that, we can see that the Ukrainians have destroyed a Russian BMP. I'm sorry if I had to jog my mind there for a second, but here's the picture. As you can see, it appears that the vehicle was hit. Apparently, the ammo exploded with enough force to flip the turret up into the air and over, and it landed onto the ground to the side of the tank. So once again, this is kind of run-of-the-mill stuff. It's very neat to see, and it's very good to see that the Ukrainians are still whipping the Russians across the entirety of the country, but there's not really much to say. This stuff happens almost across the entirety of Ukraine these days. The Russians just get beat everywhere they go, and they're held back. So moving on from that, we're going to show another T-80U that was captured in another part of the country. I'll show you all that right now.
10 березня 22-го року наші доблесті захисники вітчизни завели трофейний танк Т-80. Чуєте? Буде. Час бахуємо другий і йдемо на захист батьківщини ведемо. Вставайте, хлопці!
So I'd actually like to take a special note of a new group of people in my Discord server who are helping me out a good deal, and they are the translators. We have, I believe, 2 of them at the moment, and we had one translator today put a decent amount of effort into translating 2 videos. They translated this one, and she said, I believe there's she. I'm not really sure, but I believe that's the case. But anyways, we'll just say they. They said that the man in the video was exclaiming that the Russian tank was in running condition. They would simply refuel it and use it for themselves. And then I believe he said something along the lines of "Let's go." So it's a good thing to know that the Ukrainians are still enthusiastic about what's going on in the war, and it appears that they've been met with nothing but success holding the Russians back. Although in some places the Russians do break through, across the board they hold the Russians back, and that's great news for the Ukrainians. And hopefully they can keep on holding them. Maybe it looks like they'll hold them for several more weeks, and hopefully by then a ceasefire will be reached. Maybe the Russians will be in a position where they just cannot deny anymore that the war is going terribly, and they must reach some kind of solution to this issue. But nonetheless, we'll move on to the next video, which is Russian troops on the move. We don't know where the location is, of course, but I'll show you all the video. This is also by Russian State TV. And so what I want to mention very importantly here is that if you ever see anything from Russian state television, you have to watch out, because there's a law in Russia that has declared that anyone who's spreading misinformation about the war can be arrested. And the people who decide what's misinformation or not is the Russian government. And so they're going to make sure that all the true information that comes out is going to be painting the war in a good light and showing that the Russians are winning. And any information that may be true but is showing the Russians in a bad light will lead to the person who published that news to be arrested. So if you ever hear of the Russians talking about great successes, you have to kind of be very skeptical about that, because it could just be that that's because the state media is controlled by the government. Anyways, here's the video. The Russians always are showing that their convoys have support by the helicopters, but when we actually see them getting destroyed on drone footage, we hardly ever see helicopters present, except for in maybe one video that we saw on day 14. If you want to see that map, there's a link in yesterday's description to the day 14 map. There's a link today to the day 15 map, which only has day 15 stuff on it. But anyways, we're going to move on from that. We're going to move to the next bit of news that we've seen, which is that a Russian convoy was ambushed. I'll show you all the video. It's rather self-explanatory.
Дивіться, це все, що лишилося з вашої БМП.
На зв'язку. Ну, запашний канал.
От таке от з вами робиться. Вон башенька ваша валяється. Ідіть до нас, ми вас чекаємо, готові зустріти. Ми вас чекаємо.
But anyways, it looks like another Russian convoy was destroyed in its entirety, and so we're going to move on to the next, and this is a drone destroying a Buk air defense system. I'll show you all this video right now. It's very fun to watch, so sit back and enjoy. And I mean fun as in seeing the Ukrainians beat the Russians, not in the actual kind of idea of it. As you see, the guy at the end of the video actually just said Bayraktar. That's very cool. I mean, like, honestly, it's great that the Ukrainians use the drones to their fullest potential as far as we can tell. So we know that the Turks, who are, I believe, selling the Bayraktars to Ukraine, are making a decent profit, and the Ukrainians are getting a lot of decent victories. So I guess in the end, everyone's profiting from this one way or another, philosophically or literally. Moving on from that, we can see that there has been a captured armored column. I'll show you all this right now. I'm sorry. This is actually the same armored column that was destroyed near Chernihiv. Once again, that was corrected later on as information came out, and this one just stayed as a location unknown, and the other video was uploaded over here with the actual location. So we'll get rid of this one, just so that way the map will update, and when you'll click on the link, it hopefully will not be there. And so we're going to move on down to the area of Sumy. Today in Sumy, we've had no news rather than another convoy has been destroyed. I'll show you all that right now. As we can see, this appears that it may have been a civilian vehicle because it doesn't look like it has any paint on it that was kind of like that Russian green. It looks like it may have been some other colors. Well, maybe not. We can't really tell because it was burned so badly. But moving on from that, we can see that there was a little BTR that was also destroyed along with this logistics vehicle. And then something here that I really can't tell what it is. It kind of looks like it had a crane on it, but I don't really know what that thing would be. But we do know that it was some kind of like armored car thing-ish that was destroyed. And so that's very good news. It looks like 3 more vehicles have been destroyed around the area of Sumy. And so we know that the city of Sumy is still fighting as hard as they can, and that there's been no changes to the situation in Sumy because we haven't seen a slowdown in the fighting, and we haven't seen the Ukrainians fall back out of the city. Moving on from that, we can see that there was a large convoy in Troistinets today. I'll show you all that right now. As you can see in this picture, it is incredibly large. I can't, I mean, like, we could maybe get a count of the vehicles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 35. Maybe 35 vehicles-ish. So it's kind of like that 40-vehicle convoy that was captured near Kyiv today, but this one is in Troistinets. And what's really what's good about this, and we know this now for sure, is that the area around Sumy and Kharkiv is actually covered in snow, because this picture was confirmed to be in Troistinets, and we can see that it's still covered in snow. So we have a surefire way of knowing where the location of something is. If there's snow, it's in that area. But what's very good to see and notice about this convoy is that it appears to be nothing but a logistics convoy. It's like a ragtag group of them, as it kind of looks like they have Kamazes mixed in with gases. But nonetheless, it's like 30-something supply trucks, which would be, according to my calculations, just about enough to supply an entire BTG for a day if they were to use up their supplies every single day. So if this convoy could be wiped out, I'm not sure if it has or hasn't, because day 5 is just starting today, so maybe it has been. But if they can wipe this out, they'll probably deprive an entire BTG or more of supplies. So anyways, moving on from that, we're going to now move on down into the area of Kharkiv, where we've been getting a little bit of news. Kharkiv has kind of changed in what's happened in it. It used to be a city that was comprised of nothing but Russian infantry movements into the city, which would be repulsed. And they were usually very large. You would see about 50 Russians in a single little advance. They usually have like 2 or 3 Tigers with them. But now they've resorted to bombarding the city. So we don't see a lot of firefights anymore. It's mostly kind of like artillery fire and then counter artillery fire trying to destroy the Russian artillery. But nonetheless, We can see that there was a near miss in Kharkiv today on this video, as I believe some soldiers were inside of a building and then a bomb blew up near it. Anyways, I'll just let y'all see the video.
Доброе утро, нахуй, ебать. Ебать, доброе. Повезло, нахуй, чисто.
Anyways, you can see the bomb did fall pretty close. Luckily, no one was injured in that video as far as we knew. Maybe some people outside were, and if that was very unfortunate, but we don't have any information to go either way. So I'm going to assume and go on the safe side and have some optimism and say no one was hurt and that bomb missed just by enough. Moving on from that, we can see that Ukrainians are taking care of the dogs that have been left in Kharkiv, or maybe are just roaming the streets. But it was a nice little video, so I'll show it to y'all. Oh, there's music in that. Let me make sure that doesn't play. Oh my god. Let me turn that down. Oh my god, come on. Okay. I'm going to not play the video because if that plays again, this thing may get copyrighted. I'll get in a lot of trouble for that. But anyways, you can see he's taking care of a dog. So, that being said, we're going to move on from that. I'm very sorry about that, y'all. But we're going to move on to a Russian Smerch near Kharkiv. So you can see that these are kind of like larger versions of a Grad, and I'll just show you the video. They're pretty much just firing on Kharkiv, so here you go. So anyways, you can see that the Russian Smerches, which are apparently a larger caliber version of their Grads, were firing on the city. And then we can see that the Ukrainians were not taking this sitting down, and they were firing back with counter-artillery. I'll show y'all the Ukrainian counter-arty that was near the area of Kharkiv right here. And not only do we have one view of it, we actually have two. We actually have the view of the driver in that truck as well. It's pretty cool to actually see multiple perspectives of the same thing occurring because everyone's carrying a camera. So anyways, we're going to move on to our last bit of news in the area of Kharkiv. Well, actually, we've already covered that. So we've actually covered all the news in Kharkiv, and this may be one of the least covered days that Kharkiv has gotten during the entire course of this war. I don't know if that's because maybe power is out across some of the city, and maybe people aren't able to upload as much information as they used to, or people have just gotten used to the shelling, or there's not as many civilians there to document this information. But we haven't gotten a lot of news out of Kharkiv. And so with that, we're about to move to the southern front, and before I do, I'm going to answer some questions. And so what do we got, Drew?
First up, coming in from Good Robot, had an interesting comment. It appears that he or she may be overseas right now involved in the conflict, saying that I target the tanker vehicle with the most antennas. Typically, the command will be in the vehicle with the most comms gear.
That's actually really smart. I mean, I haven't actually thought of that. I actually haven't thought of going for the comms vehicle first. You know, once again, I don't have any, like, background in military training, so maybe that's just standard strategy. But that's actually a very smart sounding idea. And if you are currently fighting over there, I wish you the best of luck and I hope you stay safe. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next question is a two-parter coming in as two different donations from Wolfgang. Can't pronounce that second part of his username. He was in here the other day as well. Says, at the Enforcer, White House reports that Russia could start using chemical weapons. If so, would this be the last straw that the US or NATO needs to finally declare a no-fly zone over Ukraine?
Sadly, I would not think so, because we can look at a lot of historical contexts where that did not lead to that kind of situation. First off, in Iraq, it kind of led to that situation in a small way. But in Syria, we could see later on, after the Arab Spring in 2012, that Assad was using chemical weapons in Syria, and the United States or the Western world as a whole didn't get directly involved in trying to stop that situation. We got in there and we supported the SDF, the Syrian Democrat Forces, but we didn't actually go in there and just clear the country out like one would expect and install a government that would have the best, the people's best interests in mind. Sorry, I kind of butchered that getting it out, but I don't really think that would, and considering that we've seen that the West is so scared of direct involvement in a war with Russia, I think that even if they did use chemical weapons, it wouldn't really lead to anything because they're already using thermobaric weapons. We've known that they've used those in limited quantity, not as much as they can, but to an amount large enough to cause concern, and we still haven't seen the West do much of anything about it. So unfortunately, I don't think it would lead to it, but I thank you very much for the support. And what was the second part of his question?
Second part of the question. Also, what is your take on SpaceX's American broomstick comment and the possibility of Russia leaving American astronaut in space?
Ah, yes, I know what he's talking about. I believe he's talking about American astronauts are supposed to return on the Soyuz capsule back to Earth as it is, and I believe that they're threatening that they won't take the astronauts anymore. I believe that SpaceX has already claimed that they would step up and launch a Dragon capsule to bring those astronauts home, and we know that SpaceX has an incredible record with taking supplies and crew to the ISS now. So I can't really comment on the broomstick handle comment because I haven't actually heard of that one. I've been focused very much on the frontline situation in Ukraine to focus on that as well. So unfortunately, I can't answer that. But I do know that the Russians were to leave the Americans on the ISS without returning. The U.S. would probably pay SpaceX to launch a Dragon capsule and then retrieve the crew and bring them back home. So I hope that answers the question as best as I could. And I thank you very much once again for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next in comes from Jeff Brown, donating to the channel, says, good news on a different front. It was reported today that even Russian state TV is pleading with Putin to end the war.
Well, that'd be really interesting if they are. I don't actually know anything about that because I almost like never watch Russian state news because I watched it at the beginning of the war to try and see, you know, maybe I could like get the best information by listening to both sides and coming up with kind of like a compromise in between the two. But the Russians just say so much that is untrue that civilians in Russia don't even believe that they're bombing cities. And we know that to be true. We've seen more than enough videos on this channel to know that that's in fact a truth. But in Russia, they've contorted the truth so much that they don't even see that in Russia, and they don't even believe it's happening when their Ukrainian relatives call them and say they're getting bombed by the Russian army. They just simply refuse to believe that from even their own family. And so what I think is the Russian media is generally unreliable, and so I don't really follow them much. But if they are pleading with the Russians, with the Russian government to stop this war, that would be insane to me. And that's telling you that there may start to become a large amount of civil unrest if the Russians aren't even able to control the TV networks and what they're saying on television. But I don't really know about that, so that's really just my stance on what's been told. But once again, I thank you very much for the support, and if the information is true, thank you for sharing it with us, because that's a big thing as well. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Adam the Great donated to the channel and says, how is it that 8.1K, currently 7.1K, currently watching the channel and only 1,000 people have hit the like button? It only takes a second, he says.
Wait a minute, how many people are watching?
Currently 7,175.
Oh, wow. That's a huge crowd. Welcome to the stream if you're new. If you like it, make sure to like it and also comment. We'll try and answer as many questions as possible, although I'm probably about to take 2 more now and move on and cover the Southern Front. And then at the end of the stream, I just do a Hail Mary and try and answer as many of them as possible. So if you like what you're seeing and you want to see more of it, make sure to subscribe. This stream comes on every single night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, updating everyone on the last 24 hours and the events that I've seen, and maybe some of my predictions and assumptions based off of the information that was gathered over the past day. So if you like it, make sure to try and hang around, because this comes on every single night. And once again, I thank you very much for the support and telling everyone to like. That's a very nice thing of you. And so with the thanks for the support, we're going to move on to the next question.
Rainier donated to the channel and says a tank attack with no air or troop support. Was this a probe or a real try? And yes, you do take out the lead and last vehicles typically, but you are not supposed to stop if attack that way. Or you are not supposed to stop if attacked that way. USMC from 69 to 76.
Well, wow, dude, you must know what you're talking about, because that sounds like you probably would have been deployed to Vietnam, because your whole entire service was during that time. And I actually had a friend who was in the U.S. Air Force as kind of like I believed his role was a combat electrician. I really can't remember. He's been dead now for about a year and a half, but he was a very nice guy, and he told me a whole bunch of stories about what he had to deal with over there. He set up CIA listening posts in Cambodia as one of his jobs. But anyways, moving on from that, so I don't really, like, they're not supposed to stop, but let's say, like, you know, in the Chosin Reservoir situation, because they were recorded to have stopped, if the first tank was destroyed and they're on, like, a cliff face, and then on the other side of the road, there's, like, nothing but a steep descent, well, a steep ascent, there's nowhere for the tanks to go, and so they would have to stop. But in, like, the perfect situation, I'm very sure, because, of course, you have experience and you know what you're talking about for sure, that they would keep moving. But I guess in that one situation, the tanks just got stuck or something, because apparently 40 of them were captured. And to talk about kind of like the tanks not being supported by aircraft or infantry, war does change a lot, but war doesn't change in some of those aspects, because armor has really taken up the role of cavalry, and sending in cavalry without troop support in the Napoleonic era is almost perfectly equivalent in the modern era to sending in tanks without troop support. And if you look at the charge of the dragoons, I believe, during the Battle of Waterloo, it's very much resembling kind of like a Russian tank convoy moving into an area without infantry support, because the light, I believe they were called the Light Grays of the Dragoons, I'm not really sure which one, but they weren't supported by infantry. And then Napoleon also did the same thing. One of his commanders sent forward almost all the cavalry of the French army towards infantry that had been deployed into squares. The cavalry was destroyed, and infantry never even came to back them up and at least wipe out the squares, which would have been incredibly easy for them to do. And so when tanks drive into modern combat areas, at least in a historical sense, without infantry or air support, it's very similar to cavalry charging into infantry without artillery or infantry support during the Napoleonic era. So once again, I thank you very much for for confirming that what I said was true. It's good to know that as someone with prior military experience that actually knows for sure what they're talking about can back that up. So I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you very much for the comment as well, because it was very informing. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question, and then I'm going to cover the Southern Front.
This final question comes from a previously aired video where somebody left a comment on the YouTube video, states that they would like to ask you and everyone else about the Russian shelling and what we in the West can do about it. Can we get them Patriot systems or other systems such as the Israeli Iron Dome?
I believe at the moment, as far as I knew yesterday, I'm not really sure. My memory's kind of foggy because all the days are kind of blending together, and I'm not really sure if I heard this yesterday or not. But I believe that someone did say that America was sending over the Patriot missile system to Ukraine. I'm not really sure, though, if I can remember if that was a true statement or not. But I believe that we're already in the process of doing that, if that statement is assumed to be true. And so that being said, I thank you very much for the comment. I actually picked that one out from the YouTube comments section because it was a very good question, but I was so tired earlier today that I couldn't answer it, and so I made sure that we were going to answer it here on stream, because I want to make sure that everyone who has a great question, this guy had an amazing question, I wanted to make sure that we could answer it the best we could. And so, do we have any other parts to that question, or was that like summed up in a nutshell?
So that was a truncated version of a 2-paragraph question. That's the gist of it.
Got you. All right. So with that, we're going to move on to the Southern Front. And once again, I think that I forgot your name because everything. I got to say again, I'm very tired and everything meshes together when you do this for weeks. But I thank you very much for the question. It was a very solid question. And when I looked at it, I was just too tired to type at the time, but I made sure that we were going to answer that in stream. So if you're watching, I thank you very much for the question. It was a great question. And so anyways, we're going to move on to the area of Luhansk, and we've seen that the Russians have gotten in such a stretch for vehicles that they're now using dump trucks to transport troops. I guess one could say this is an allegorical kind of statement, saying that the Russians already know what they are, which is trash. Anyways, I'll just show you all the video.
Ему привет! Идем на укропов. Как настроение? Вот. Все будет хорошо. Все вернемся домой к женам, к детям. Ждите нас, приедет все. Все хорошо будет. Удачи. Спасибо большое. Что, не заводится?
Не заводится. Вот такие военные будни у нас. Лиза, доча, привет. Увидимся скоро. Не крути стартера.
It's always good to know that the Russians have the best equipment available to them, and they can help themselves to as much of it as they want, because the waste department found out there's worse trash than what they're picking up off the street as the Russian soldiers, and so they can have all of the dump trucks that they want. And so moving on from that, we're going to move on to the next area near Svitlodarsk, where we can see that the Ukrainians were fighting today. I'll show you that video. Well, actually, it's a series of pictures. This one was very, very good. I mean, like, you know, it's a war, and so, you know, you kind of have to take it in that context. But in the terms of just the cinematography, I don't really know how to say the word right now. I think my brain is kind of slowing down at this point, but the quality of the picture and just like the artistic beauty of it in a way is just can't be overstated. This was an incredibly good picture. I'm sure that'll actually become a good propaganda poster for the Ukrainians after the war as a recruitment kind of like ad for the Ukrainian army. Moving on from that, we can see that there's been some more captured or destroyed Russian vehicles like supply trucks and APCs. And so that being said, we can see that there has been fighting around Svitlodarsk, and what's crazy is that it's actually right on the border that I said the Donetsk and Luhansk republics controlled, which is the Black Line. The Black Line is their original borders before the invasion, and the Red Line is kind of where it's assumed the front line is now. And it's really crazy because that was actually spot on, and I did that free-handed without really knowing where the exact borders were on the first day. So moving on from that, we can see in Mariupol there's been a decent bit of news today. We've seen that a TOS was destroyed outside of Mariupol, nearby, and I'll show you all this right now. I didn't know that when TOS vehicles got hit, they exploded that massively. But if that's the way they do explode, then I believe that's more of a danger to the Russians than the Ukrainians, because if it gets hit and explodes at that scale and size, it's going to wipe out a whole bunch of stuff around it, most likely. But anyways, we're going to move on from that video. There's not much to say there. Just one TOS destroyed. Great thing for Ukraine. Terrible thing for Russia, because I don't think they have a lot of those. But I'm not really sure. That's entirely just kind of like based on nothing. I'm assuming that since the rarity of the pictures we've seen of them in the country, I'm assuming they don't have a large amount of them. Moving on from that, we've seen that there has been more damage in Mariupol as the battle for the city still goes on. The Ukrainians are still valiantly holding the city and buying the defenders through the rest of the country valuable time, where these Russian units that are engaging this city could be elsewhere helping out the Russian cause in some other way. So I'm going to show you all this video.
10 марта 2022 год. Авиаудар, центр города. Иду показать вам, какой ущерб они наносят, и как они ведут местами бои. Вот смотрите, вороночка, как вчера на роддоме. А вот наши ребята уже проверяют. Нормально пароли.
Узкоглазые фашисты, блядь.
Центр города.
Центр города, драмтеатр рядышком.
I'd have no clue what kind of missile or explosive could cause a hole that size, but the hole was absolutely massive. It looked like it was maybe 30 feet deep and about 120 feet wide, based off of, you know, just eyeballing it. So whatever caused that explosion had to have been massive, at least several tons of explosives or more. So moving on from that, we're going to go down to the further southeastern side of the city, where we can see that there's been a large amount of explosions in Mariupol, directly on the civilian buildings. Show you all that right now. Now, I saw a lot of comments today because I saw this video posted multiple times and watched it multiple times to see if I could get any more information out of the comments section. And I saw a lot of people who were kind of like pro-Russian, I guess you could say, or bots, perhaps, that were saying, I'm so sick and tired of seeing Ukrainians claim that every single commie block is filled with civilians, because they're totally not, because everyone's been evacuated. But the problem with that statement is that we know good and well no one was evacuated out of Mariupol, because one, there's no refugee corridor for the refugees to escape out of, and we know if they tried, the Russians would just gun them down, like we've at least heard and seen in other areas. And on top of that, even at that, it's under siege, and so there's really no way for these people to leave. And so you know that the city of around 500,000 people is being bombarded day in and day out, and there's civilians all through the city, and the Russians are just mercilessly bombarding them and the soldiers. And so that was a really dumb statement that I saw from a lot of people on Reddit today that were saying that kind of stuff. It was ridiculous, and I just had to say that because I saw that, and it was the dumbest thing I'd ever seen. And so we're going to move on from that, and we can see that we've gotten more pictures today of the attack on the hospital yesterday. I'm still not really sure if this was a maternity ward or a children's hospital, but nonetheless, it was attacked and the damage was significant. Very unfortunate. So with that being said, we've covered all the news that we have in Mariupol. I haven't actually gotten any confirmed information about how bad the situation is inside the city at this point. We know that at this rate, it can only be deteriorating due to it being an actual siege, and there is no chance of resupply. So we know that the situation will be getting worse and worse throughout the days as they go by, but we don't know by how much. And so if I can get any information on that, I'll try and let y'all know, and hopefully the Ukrainian defenders can hold out for as long as possible. Anyways, we're going to move on to the city of Melitopol, where today we've seen that there were more protests, as they have apparently never ceased, even in the face of being shot by the Russians, as we've seen in the previous video. I'll show you all this right now. It's rather self-explanatory. I believe this is actually two cities combined into one video, but I counted it as Melitopol because Melitopol, I believe, is the larger city of the two. As you can see, the riot, well, it's not really a riot. This one's more of a protest, but in Kherson, there's riots, so I'm kind of getting the wordage mixed together. But you can see that the protests have never stopped, and I don't believe they ever will. I believe civilian resistance will just continue on throughout the course of this entire war. And it tells me this, is that if the Russians are never able to really get the Ukrainians on their side in the captured territories, they're never going to get any support behind the lines. And so they're going to lose this war, because there will eventually be some resistance groups that do pop up, and whether they're really successful or not is beside the point. It's just going to waste a lot of Russian resources and manpower, because they're going to have to be trying to quash these things all across the captured territories that they'll control. Moving on from that, we're going to move on to the city of Mykolaiv. We've had very few developments out of the city today, but we have seen that a Pantsir was captured, and there was an actual price tag attached to this picture. $15 million. And we know that at least five of these things have been captured. And so that's around $75 million in captured pantsirs alone. That's getting close to $100 million. And when you get into the $100 million range, you're starting to actually look at a countable percentage of the yearly Russian military budget. I didn't actually know that these things cost about the 3 times the cost of a T-90, but now that we do know that, that's something impressive to actually see these things get captured more so than any normal tank like a T-80U or a T-90. So moving on from that, we can see that inside the city, there's been a captured AK-12. I don't know how they got this, and I don't really know how bad the fighting has been in the city at the moment, but for him to have captured an AK-12, it tells us that there is some level of fighting in the city to some degree. Anyways, it looks like it's in good condition, and so hopefully they'll use that against the Russians, which will be really ironic and funny in a way, you know, considering that the Russians will be getting killed by their own gun. Moving on from that, we're going to move on to the area around Odessa, where we have seen a Russian ship firing some kind of projectiles in some direction, but we don't really know where. All we know is that it was off the coast near Odessa. So I'll just show you all the video. It happens very quickly at the first few seconds. Right there. So we don't know what they're firing at, but we do know that they're firing and they're close enough to the shore to be filmed. And so with that being said, we've covered the southern front, and we're going to cover the international areas as well, what happened in Turkey and what happened in Russia today. We can see that there was a load of people, much like they're gathering up at the ATMs now to try and withdraw their money and exchange it for either dollars or pounds or something like that. We can now see that the Russians are not only doing that and panic buying Big Macs, they're panic buying anything Western. As we can see in this department store, there are people lined up for hours trying to buy anything out of the store. So I'll just show that to y'all real quick. Quite the line right there, I can tell you that. And they're going to be there for quite a while. And what would be really funny is if the stores just closed. I'm sure they wouldn't, because the store still wants to make a profit even though their parent company is closing them. It will take them hours to transact all those people and their purchases through that line. It's going to take ages. So anyways, moving on from that, we've heard that the Ukrainian and Russian talks that were conducted in Ankara today have fallen apart. The Russians apparently are still demanding that the Ukrainians surrender, and the minister who was representing Ukraine during this these discussions declared that the country would never surrender. And so that being said, we have covered all the news today, and so we'll be taking nothing but questions for the rest of the stream. And so with that, what kind of questions do we have, Drew?
Okay, first up coming in from Fishy Candy. Donated to the channel, says, love the content. Can you please start recording and posting this? I can't always stay up, got work. Second, can you please always include anything you find on the TOS1 thermobaric MLRS? And also another commenter did mention about the TOS-A1 platform.
Yes, I believe they're all talking about the TOS1 thermobaric weapons or the launchers. I'm not really sure what the TOS-1 designation is referencing, but I try and get as much information as possible, but unfortunately I cannot find a lot of information about them. So the one video I found today that was claimed to be a TOS-1 blowing up in the distance is all the information I've been able to find on them. It seems like there may be few of them, and so information about their location, whereabouts, and their activities are mostly unknown, at least as far as I know. If any of y'all would like to join the Discord and make it your sole job to find tosses and information about them, and then send that to me, I'll try and include it in the stream, because I try and get all the information I can find at all on these streams. And as you can see, it's about 39 points a night. Usually it's around 40, but there's not a lot, and so finding information about a toss in particular is rather difficult. To address the second point about the video, I do upload these as videos afterwards. These are released as nothing but a recap of the live stream, so you can watch the entire thing from start to finish at any time you please. But it will be after the stream ends. And so by the time you see it, it'll probably be morning the next day on day 16, and you'll be watching the day 15 news. But they are uploaded. They are on the channel, every single one of them from day 1 to now. So if you would like to see them, just make sure to click on the channel. You can go through them. Just make sure to skip through the first few minutes or so, because that's the intro card, and you know, it just stays there for several minutes. But once you skip through that, you'll get straight to the news, and you'll just be watching the stream like it's any other night, but it's just pre-recorded. And so I thank you very much for the support, and I will try and get some more information about the tosses if I can. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next question comes from John Smith, who donated to the channel. Thoughts on Russia laying the groundwork to use the U.S. as a scapegoat when the Russians use bioweapons in this war, like they did in Syria, hence the whole biolab conspiracy?
I don't really know much about the biolab conspiracy, so I really can't attest to anything about it. But I do think that the Russians may use the Americans, or maybe try and stage some sort of false, I don't really know if this is the correct use of the term, but a false flag terrorist attack inside of Russia that's actually conducted by the Russians, but then they blame it on the Ukrainians, and then they start using chemical weapons against them. Once again, using chemical weapons is just a blatant violation of the rules of war, especially the modern ones, and the Geneva Convention. Chemical warfare is considered inhumane, and so it's banned. But nonetheless, the Russians may use it, and they may try and fabricate an excuse to make it seem like it is a worthy thing to be used. I can't really talk about that much in depth, because I really don't know much about like the down the rabbit hole biolabs kind of stuff. You know, a lot of people are saying that Russia went to war because America was trying to produce some kind of bioweapon in Ukraine. I don't really believe that's the reason. I believe it's a much more practical and simple reason, because you have to think the world is not a complicated place. When you live your normal lives, they're not complicated, and so there isn't some extra special echelon that we're all not seeing. It's all basic level stuff. Everything's simple, and it's just the illusion of everything being difficult that kind of holds people back. But everything's incredibly simple, and the whole reason that they kind of got engaged in this war was because the front line with NATO, if Ukraine was to join NATO, would be thousands of miles longer than it is now. Because right now they only share a border with NATO through Belarus, because Belarus is kind of Russia's puppet. But if Ukraine joined NATO, they would have thousands of miles of border. And if they actually win against Ukraine and they take it over and they install some kind of puppet government or anything like that, their border with NATO is significantly shorter than the alternative. And so that's the whole reason that this war started. But once again, I thank you for the support. I'm sad I really couldn't answer that question well. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Tito McLovin, who donated to the channel, asks, can Ukraine sappers get a Scooby-Doo gang van and disrupt supply rail systems in the north and the border in Belgorod area? A key rail bridge could really hamper Russian supply from the east.
Belgorod. I need to pull that up real quick to see.
Belgorod. Belgorod.
Belgorod in Belgorod Oblast. Oh, I've seen this a million times before. It's just that I wasn't thinking. Maybe, I mean, like, you know, who knows? I mean, like, the Russians have been known to be doing saboteur and spy operations and looking and taking on the uniforms of Ukrainians and stuff. And so maybe they could get a Scooby-Doo van and they could just start conducting sabotage operations against the railheads leading into Ukraine. We did get a little bit of information last night from a viewer that the Russians are working on laying some kind of flexible pipeline network. It's like kind of like a large garden hose, if that's the best way to put it, or a fire hose maybe. That'd be more adept description of it. But apparently they're laying one of those down somewhere, and it may be used to transport fuel. And so that may suggest that the pipeline brigades that the Russians use in their logistical divisions, well, actually, they're entirely separate logistical divisions that focus on nothing but pipelines. It may suggest that they're active now, and they're actually trying to fix the logistical situation and lessen the burden on the trucks. So if the little Scooby-Doo van and the whole saboteur thing with that was able to succeed, and they were able to destroy railheads, that would at least destroy the ability for the Russians to attempt to resupply things that couldn't be transported by the pipelines that they will now be constructing. So I mean, like it's a possibility. I don't really know how feasible it is, but who knows? We might see something like that happen within the next few days. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Blown Apart donated to the channel and also states that he donates or they donate to Wiki Public Radio as well. All free services that I use and feel should be supported. So thank you. I check in daily.
Well, thank you very much for the support. I'm glad that you're supporting all the channels you believe are doing a good job. I'm very honored that you think I'm doing a good job. And so I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next question. I'm not too sure what it means, but Doug H donated and says drone points of ref ... See my link in chat.
Ah, yes. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we don't open links in the chat. We did. I think we tried to do that one time and we immediately regretted it. So we've made a general rule now that we won't open up links in the chat. We'll do it after stream, but we can't do it during chat. But I do think that he's talking about like a drone point of reference, like where a drone was or where it was looking or something. But we will look into that after the stream if we can. But once again, I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
So kind of skipping the line a little bit, Vastly1 donated and asks, did you guys ever go over that Russian soldier TikTok video that he asked about yesterday? We didn't know if it was going to be a link that could be viewed in the stream. So I never took a second look at that. I don't know if you spent any time on that one.
I think I did, but I was so tired that I don't really remember what it was about.
I guess the thing I was missing is I don't know what the question was, right? There wasn't a question. There was a link that says, I have a question, but I couldn't find what is your question about it. So that one's kind of just left floating out there where even if we did view the video, we don't know exactly what your question was associated to it.
I tell you what, let's make sure we follow up with this fella here because he wants an answer to this question. If you can join the Discord, if you're still watching, make sure to join the Discord and DM Stream Enforcer and say, hey, I'm so-and-so from the stream. I was just wanting to follow up with this. Here's the link again. And he'll send it to me and we'll both take a look at it and I'll try and answer your question at least within the next day or so. Well, I don't know about tomorrow. There's a whole load of things going on tomorrow. So it may be Saturday or tonight. I don't really know, but I thank you very much for the support. And we will try and get around to answering that question if we can. Just make sure to try and join the Discord for us. And so we can make sure to touch base with you and try and answer that question the best we can. And so with that, thank you very much for the support once again. And we're going to move on to the next question.
Next question comes in from Kevin Scott, who donated, asks, what Russian YouTubers know the real deal? Question mark.
I don't really watch a lot of Russian YouTubers. I really hate that I can't give anyone good answers because these questions are kind of beyond the scope of what I've been focusing on for the past 2 weeks, kind of in a way, because I focus on like frontline developments, and so if you have any questions about that, I try and answer those. But I really don't know about Russian YouTubers. I believe the only one I've ever seen is Life of Boris, and I don't even know if he's Russian. He may just be from a country elsewhere, in kind of like the Slavic regions. So I don't really know if there are any that know what's going on. I think there's some Russian YouTuber that I've watched recently, NF CKRZ or something like that. And he seems to be kind of on the fence about saying something, but then again, you can get arrested over there, and I don't really think anyone's wanting to run the risk of arrest to say what's actually going on in their opinion. So with that being said, I thank you very much for the support. I'm sorry I couldn't answer the question that well, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
The next question is pulled out of the general chat where username Los Angeles asks, how is this a fair fight? How is this a fair fight if Russia keeps giving Ukraine all this military equipment?
That's a very good question, and I don't really know how it will end up being a fair fight. I don't know if the Ukrainians have the ability to train crews to operate these tanks, but we do know that their crews do survive their tanks being destroyed when they eventually are. There are plenty of replacements further back that they're probably storing at this point to use later. So I don't really know. I mean, like, the Russians really are kind of doing a supply operation to give the Ukrainians free tanks at this point, but I don't really know if that will actually turn out to be anything important or not, because while, you know, a lot of tanks are nice and it's helping out the Ukrainians with their supply of tanks, you also have to consider the supply of trained Ukrainian tankers and how many are there of those? And if there are a small amount, then that means there was only a limited number of tanks that can be fielded effectively. And then you'd have to try and train people on these tanks and give them a crash course, and then they probably wouldn't be as effective. But nonetheless, very good question. And it's a very funny one too. It's a good joke as well. And so I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and I do see that Vastly posted another super chat saying, "Okay, check the video out. My question was about first second, and sorry, I'm not able to Discord at this time, but the video is super funny. So I guess Vastly, if you could, I'll try and see if you post another chat in there. What is your question? I get that the question is about the first second, but what would you like us to answer about it? And thank you for the donation."
Yes, thank you very much for the support. We thank everyone who can support this channel. It means a lot to all of us here that are working around the clock to try and provide this information. And so I thank you very much for the support. We'll take a look at it, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, another super chat from Fishy Candy says, "Thank you. I assume in regards to answering the previous question, I appreciate the TO's thing is a phase 3 weapon. By the way, I usually am the duck season on the channel. However, Google will not let me contribute under that. Sent you Discord, Devil Doc."
Got you, man. I'll take a look at the Discord later to see your message, and I thank you very much for the support as usual. And you touched on the toss a little bit, and we are trying to get information about it. It's just I can't find any, and that kind of puts a bit of a hamper on getting any information about them, because if I can't see any, then there's really nothing for me to report. But we will try and get back around to the tosses and try and figure out some more information on them. But once again, thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next question comes from Doug Sharp via Super Chat. "Have you heard any Ukrainian use of IEDs? They were a mainstay in the Iraqi resistance, but I haven't heard a mention of IEDs in this war."
I haven't heard a mention of IEDs either, and I do not believe that they are being used. I believe that the Ukrainians have kind of focused on their behind-the-lines kind of partisan attacks on Russian military units, more so on Molotovs, because we saw during the earlier days of the war, Molotov production seemed to be the priority, and we didn't see any productions of any IEDs, and we haven't seen any damage produced on Russian vehicles from IEDs, and so I don't think there are any being used at the moment, actually. But we'll have to see in the coming days if the Ukrainians do start to decide to use IEDs instead of Molotov cocktails or something less effective. And so I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
So actually today, just to comment on the IED question, I saw a video that was posted over there on the combat forum today, which appeared to show Ukrainian soldiers standing next to a car battery linked up to a long wire that may have been involved in initiating an explosion on a Russian convoy. I can try and chase that down to share with you, Enforcer.
Yeah, if we can get that, I'll actually include that in tomorrow's stream as like a next day thing, but I will show it, because as far as I know, I haven't actually seen any IEDs used, so if we do have something like that, I'd love to actually mention that, because a lot of people have had very good questions if those have been used or not. And so thank you very much for letting me know that's true, and with that, I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, so skipping around a little bit, Vastly1 posted another super chat saying basically the first second of the running Russian soldiers in the TikTok video, there appears to be a person being dragged or captured, and they are curious what that one was about. So we do have a question now. Thank you.
All right. So now that we know the question, we'll try and circle back on that if we can make a note about that, Drew, to answer that first thing on the live stream tomorrow. We'll watch the video, and I'll try and make a comment on it within the first bits of the live stream tomorrow. And yeah, we'll take a look at it, and we'll see what we can kind of like gather out of it. And so I thank you very much for the support once again. I think that's like the 4th time you've done that tonight. So thank you very much. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question. Also, I'd like to say before we move on, if you're thinking about donating and you have a question, this is going to be the cutoff point. So if you have a question and you were going to donate, I would not donate because I won't be able to answer the questions anymore. The stream will be ending soon. And so with that, we're going to move on to about the last. Wait, how many super chats do we have in a backlog right now?
You've got 10 super chats that have questions attached to them, about another 8 or so that just have thanks or good vibes attached to them. And then there's the 2 that you had asked me to slip into the conversation from the YouTube comments.
Got you. Can we cover all the people who have supported the channel but have no comment, so that way we can give them their credit?
Okay, yes, let's go through those real quick. So Sergey Bentayin, I can't say that last name, but Sergey chipped in $20 and then another $20. Very much appreciated. Captain Chris chipped in $5, says Slava Ukraine. We have Paul Healy chipped in $10, says no question, just a thank you for what you're doing. Pavel snuck in there again with $1. We have Sea Dog Pirate chipped in $1, and then Andrew J chipped in $10 Australian. I think he might have done that again. Might have been a twofer. So thank you, everybody.
And thank you everyone for the support. And so we're going to move on to since we have so many super chats in the backlog, I would really like if no one did a super chat at all at this point, because I don't want y'all to support the channel and get nothing out of it. I'd at least like to try and answer y'all's questions. So if everyone could make sure not to do any super chats, I'm going to answer the remaining super chats, a few questions from the chat, and then we're going to wrap this up. And so what questions do we have next, Drew?
RD Law says, hey, love your stream. Why do the Russians look so untrained? The tanks that were hit were bunched up, and A-10 could destroy the lot.
I think that they appear untrained because the Russian military budget, and from what we know of their training regimen, is very lax, and it's also lax just because of the budget. And so just to kind of like cover why I think that, we'll just go over the tanker training alone. A tank gunner in the United States is reported to kind of like practice fire on the range at least 30 rounds a year, while the average Russian tank gunner is trained firing around 10 rounds a year. And so if you're looking at that right there alone to kind of like get a generalization of how Russian army training is conducted, apparently it's conducted very cheap, and so people don't really get to know their job field well or the tactics they're using well at all, and so everything is just much more inefficient. And so I believe that all that may come down, and this is nothing more than my opinion, but this all may come down to a lack of budget for the Russians to be able to train these soldiers as effectively as the United States does. And while the United States, I mean, like, you know, most militaries aren't perfect. Well, all militaries aren't perfect. There's always some shortcomings in every military. But due to America's oversized, super huge military budget that's uncomparable to any other country on Earth at the moment, we are able to train our soldiers to a much higher degree than anyone else is. Even if it looks like at home we could still do better, we're doing leaps and bounds better than any other country on Earth. And so, that being said, I really think it's just a lack of budget for them to be able to train them properly. And so I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and as just a reminder to everybody out there who's looking to donate, there are links in the description for where you can donate to charitable organizations that are helping to provide relief efforts to the refugees over there.
And also to double down on what Drew just said, tomorrow I should be able to have the give function activated on the live chat, which means that I'll be able to kind of like fundraise for a cause. And right now I'm probably eyeballing the American Red Cross and their efforts inside of Ukraine. I believe it's a good cause, and I'm not really sure if that will be the exact one, but that's what will probably be up in the live chat tomorrow for everyone if y'all would like to be interested in that. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next question comes in from Austin Ben. For Ukraine to genuinely win this, they need to retake territory, not just hold it. Assuming best case scenario, what might the options for that be?
I believe the best case scenario at this point, it's really hard to say though, because we don't know the Ukrainian position kind of in this war. We don't know how well it is or how bad off it is, but I believe that the first thing I would do is directly counter what this little offensive is going to be down here and punch back through to Mariupol. This will disconnect the Donbass from the Crimea area and the Kherson region, and it'll split this area in two. The other important thing I could see, I would see most developments happen in the south, because that's where the most land has been taken. And if we're just talking about retaking land, it appears that there would be the best opportunity for that in the south, although the Russians do have a better advantage in the south because the ground is drier and the tanks are able to move more freely and go off-road and stuff. But the other thing I would see that's incredibly important is once again retaking the city of Kherson, because that would split off the Russian forces in Mykolaiv from the rest of the front, and then they would be encircled practically. And as long as the Ukrainians could hold Kherson, things would be pretty okay. They don't really have to launch an offensive back across the bridge. They just have to cut off Kherson so that way the soldiers up near Mykolaiv would eventually starve themselves into surrendering. So I believe that if there was a limited level of recapturing of land, I believe those two kind of like offensives combined would be the best option for the Ukrainians. But that's entirely my opinion, and I don't really want to go into that too much because who knows? You know, I might like be hitting this stuff on the nail and giving Russians ideas. You know, there could be Russians in the chat, and so I don't really want to talk too much about what the Ukrainians could do in return because it could, you know, lead to bad results because maybe they'll lead to better planning on someone's part. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Pulling a question straight out of the chat, Jean Sebastian Roy asks, is this channel neutral or pro-Ukrainian?
This channel is pro-Ukrainian, but we do like to try and keep the news neutral. So I will admit sometimes when the Ukrainians are losing in some places, like I make no pretense that Mariupol is in a very bad situation. There's just no way around that. I try and stay neutral in the reporting of the news because while I do support Ukraine, just because I support something does not mean that I'm going to start skirting around the facts and come up with some kind of fake story, because it's best for us to look at this truthfully, so that way we can understand the situation that'll be coming up in the next few days instead of just living in a daydream fantasy world. So yes, I am pro-Ukrainian, but the news that is reported is mostly neutral as best as possible. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question. And thank you very much for supporting the channel. I'm not really sure if you are a super chat, but I do thank everyone for their support and their questions regardless.
So next question is a super chat. Is Putin going to have a lot of angry millennials not being able to buy products like the PS5? Not that they could buy it anyways. I mean, supply.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you very much for adding that, Drew. That we don't even have enough PS5s in the United States for anyone to buy. So in Russia, I don't even know if that would be the case there. But we saw a bunch of angry millennials in that line in this video. You can find this map and the link in the description below and go take a look at this link again. But we saw a lot of angry millennials in that line, and so I'm sure that a whole bunch of millennials are going to be angry about everything that was a Western good that is no longer able to be purchased in Russia because Western businesses have just left the country. So that being said, I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Next super chat comes in from Ben Fran. Have you seen the Maxar satellite images from today? Apparently, the 40-kilometer convoy has budged out into the forest from the road. Any thoughts?
I actually did cover that. I did not see the pictures, but I actually did get the news that the 40-mile long convoy has dispersed in a way, but at least 17 miles of it are still stuck on the road. And so what that suggested to me earlier in the stream is that the Russians are in fact out of supplies because they've only moved them into the surrounding forests, and then some of the units went to the front lines, but they're in the low kind of like action areas where nothing's really happening and they're not eating up a lot of supplies. So it's telling, and you know, on top of that, 17 miles of it still has not moved and it's stuck on the road. And so that tells me that the Russians were not, in fact, these 4D chess players who were just thinking everything out to the nth degree. They did run out of supplies and they were just sitting there on the road. And so I thank you very much for the support. That was a great question. Maybe you just weren't around at the beginning of the stream to get the news, and that's fine. You know, everyone kind of like gets on whenever they get on. But I thank you very much for being here. I thank you very much for the support, and I hope you hang around to listen to the rest of the news I have on the war. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next super chat comes in from Nitro Dragon. There's a very good video from Yemen of the TOS 1 Alpha being used. It gives a very good example of what a strike looks like at night.
I'll have to take a look at that now that you mentioned that, so that way I do know what that looks like. So that way if we see anything similar to that, we may be able to maybe discuss that it may be a TOS or it may exactly be a TOS. So thank you very much for letting me know that. I'm definitely going to check that out. Once again, thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
The next super chat comes in from The Majestic Turtle. Have you heard about the legendary Canadian sniper named Wally joining Ukraine? That's got to be terrifying for Russians' psychology.
I did hear about Wally joining Ukraine, but the news site that I saw that information come off of was very questionable. Although that's been confirmed later on, it just never made it into the news because there were so many points, and I didn't want to start stretching this thing out way too long because I do get tired, and I'm always tired these days, and I don't want to be on here for 3 hours. So while I try and report the most important news, some things like that do slip through the cracks. One, because the news source that was saying it didn't really look entirely credible, and two, it wasn't like the most important thing. Because while he's a great sniper, there was a whole bunch of other stuff I believe that was going on during that time. I think at that point, the Russians were actually at Kyiv Zoo, and so there was a whole bunch of stuff to report on in Kyiv, and so I believe that one just slipped through the cracks. But I thank you very much for the support. It was a good question. I do think that it's probably terrifying to the Russians that they will have that the Ukrainians will have a high-end sniper working for them. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next super chat comes in from Takata Store, who has been a frequent donator to the channel. Can Putin save face at this time?
Putin cannot save face anymore, at least in my opinion. The war's dragged on too long. It's on its 15th day. There's been really no progress that is of any note, rather than the capture of the city of Kherson, which was not really much. I mean, like, it was only 20 miles away from the Crimean border, and it's in a very tough position to defend, I would suppose, although it only has one bridge leading into the city, so I don't know about that claim. But they haven't really done much, and so I don't really think that he could save face, because if he nukes the country, he loses face. If he continues the war, he loses face because the Russian army's embarrassment. And if he signs a peace agreement with the Ukrainians, pretty much leaving everything status quo antebellum, he's still losing face because everything that he did was a joke. And so I don't think there's any way that he could save face at this point, and I thank you very much for your support. I hope that answered the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
Okay, so next question comes in from Igor C. I believe that Baltic countries are members of NATO, is his statement.
I believe that statement may be true. Let me check to make sure. As far as I know, they are NATO members. Let's find that. Let's see. Oh, this is the NATO website. Cool, they got a website. Let's see what countries they have. It doesn't tell me. Member countries. There we go. All right, so let's take a look and see. Okay, we got Lithuania. So we know that at least we got Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. Okay, so yes, all three of the Baltic states are in fact members of NATO. So that assumption is true. So I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, second to last super chat comes in from Look in the Mirror, who has donated over the past few days. Is the Russian public opinion evolving?
The Russian public opinion is evolving for some groups of people, and it's not for others. Some people in Russia doggedly defend what Russia is doing, and they do not believe any information that the Russians are committing war crimes or otherwise inside of Ukraine. I kind of find that really weird too, because during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan in the United States, whenever the public would hear that Americans have killed civilians, everyone was like abhorrently offended about what they had heard. And meanwhile, the Russians just completely deny that their government is doing anything like that. So it's kind of weird. But then there's a decent group of people in Russia that are protesting in St. Petersburg and Moscow, but the government's cracked down on them a lot and started arresting them en masse. And so a lot of those people have started going underground with their resentment. So yes, in some degrees it is evolving, in some other degrees it's not. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that answered the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
So the final super chat question comes in from Maximad. Says that General Mudd is coming for the Russian armor.
Do you know who General Mudd is?
General Mudd, I believe, is the mushy earth.
Oh, I thought it was like Mud with 2 D's or something, you know, like some general I had never heard about. But yes, if you're talking about the Rasputisa, yes, it's coming for him. It's never letting them have a break. So I thank you very much for the support. That was actually pretty good. It took me a while to catch on, probably because I'm just tired, but I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to 3 questions from the chat, and then we're going to wrap this up. So what questions do we have from the chat?
So David G asked near the beginning of the stream, are the Russian vehicles mostly diesel or gasoline powered?
Oh man, that's kind of a tough question for me to answer, because I believe some of them are diesel powered and then some of them are gas powered. Because I believe the T-72s operate off of a diesel engine, and then the T-80s operate off of a gas turbine. So I think it's kind of like it depends on which kind of tank we're talking about. Let's pull that up. Does the T-72 use diesel? Run on it runs on 3 different kinds: diesel, benzene, or kerosene. And then what wait a minute, does the T-80 use gas? Yes, so yeah, it's a different question, it's a different answer depending on the tank. With T-80s, yes, it's a gas turbine, but with the T-72, it could be diesel or benzene or kerosene. But the point still stands that it's actually different fuel sources for different vehicles, and then that complicates the logistical chain, because now you're having to provide 2 separate fuels to different kinds of tanks, and that causes a world of shit, pretty much. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. I'm glad I can answer the question. I actually kind of found out something there myself. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next question. I didn't copy over the username, but they ask, have you heard about ejection seats not working properly? Gossip is disabled on purpose to stop prisoners?
I don't know about the second part, but the first part, I don't really know about the ejection seats not working. But I do know that I have been able to upload a decent amount of pictures of Russian pilots that appear to not have a good time with them. I don't know if the chutes failed to deploy or if they just ejected late and then they kind of like skipped across the ground or something. But from what I could tell, in some cases, they may not be working, because there's been a decent amount of pilots I've just seen get smacked. But then, some of them do eject, and we've seen their chutes deploy, and they're just, gliding down over Ukraine. So I think it's kind of like a half and half situation. It kind of depends on the actual ejection seat that they're using and if it's just reliable or not. And so with that, we're going to move on to the last question, I believe.
Final question comes in from Benny Tome. The Enforcer. Do the Russians have defense missiles or on their newer tanks to stop Javelin or other weapons? I did see them. And did we see them yet in battle?
We haven't seen them yet in battle, because we've seen the most modern tanks in the Russian arsenal be destroyed by javelins. That includes T-80 BVMs, T-80 BVs, T-80Us, T-90As, T-72 B3s. We've seen all of these get destroyed, and they're the best tanks in the Russian arsenal as well. They have not skimped on these at all. They're not missing any sort of upgrade packages from what we can tell, and it appears that they're being destroyed by javelins very easily. So I don't really think they have any kind of missile defense system on their tanks. Like the T-90As had some kind of trophy system. It's the little I think it's they're the blocky looking little sensors on the front of the turret, and they only kind of like misguided Generation 1 ATGMs, but they're pretty much ineffective against modern ATGMs. So I don't really think they have a defense against that. And so that being said, we've reached the end of the questions, and we've actually reached the end of the stream. I hope I've given you all some news and some information that is new, or at least eye-opening. I hope that y'all have had a fun time watching the stream. If you're new to the channel, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure to subscribe for sure, and join the Discord if you do, because sometimes YouTube likes to go through and delete the subs and then maybe bring them back at some point, or just delete them permanently. And so if you join the Discord, you'll never be late for a stream, because I always announce when the streams are beginning. And also, every once in a while I try and talk to people when I'm not, like, just absolutely exhausted. But I thank y'all very much for your time. I hope it was a great stream, and I wish y'all all the best. I hope y'all have a great night, and I'll see y'all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time for the next stream on day 16. Thank you, and good night.